Welcome to this episode of My Home is Special. Today we're going to talk about Chile. And
Hey Keith,
yeah,
I think I got this one. Let me do it. What's up, everybody? We're back for My Home is Special. I'm Taylor. You guys know me. And I'm super excited for this episode on a personal level. I actually had a childhood best friend that was from Chile, and I loved Caro's voice, and I loved this episode just because of the visuals of it. So I'm super excited to dig in and talk a little bit more about some of the things that Keith saw, what he experienced. And I think, like we always talk about in each one now that we've been here, it's 3 episodes in. What's the story? So, you ready, Keith?
let's do it.
Okay.
Pisa Maria, Pisa Maria, na cabeça de la serpiente, Virgen Maria.
First question, did you get into everything that Caro suggested? There was a lot there, and I think there was a lot of pretty visualization just about some of the things that you really needed to see, but were you able to get to it all?
So first of all, we tried to do everything that she put on our list and then some. So we did Atacama, we did Santiago, where she's from. We went down to Torres del Paine in Patagonia. We didn't get a chance to do Easter Island. I didn't realize that it was like, I don't know, a 4 or 5 hour flight from the mainland, and it was a pretty expensive flight. So we weren't able to do that. But more importantly, when we got to Santiago, I texted Caro and said, hey, we're in your hometown. And she immediately responded, you need to do this, and this, and eat at this restaurant, this restaurant, this restaurant, and this restaurant. And I'm proud to say we did everything that she told us to do while we were there, and it was awesome.
I'm actually really excited to hear that. I guess kind of digging into a little bit of what you did see and what Caro suggested. What were some of the things that really stuck out to you?
You know, the first thing we did, as I mentioned in the last episode, we did the handoff at the Bolivia-Chile border to go to the Atacama Desert, which I didn't know was the driest place on earth. I had never heard of it. I had never heard that it was the driest place on earth, obviously, but Caro said to go and said so many great things. And I've traveled a lot and we've seen some really amazing places, but the landscapes and the geology in this area, it was like going to another planet. They had their own moon valley. We went to one in Bolivia where they imagined that it was this like the surface of the moon, and the pictures were really cool from there. But Chile and Atacama had its own moon valley that was also just really fascinating. And even though we were in the desert, there were a lot of animals, you know, flamingos, vicuñas, and even a fox who was getting into it with some of the animals. And I sort of climbed up the side of this little hill, cliff, mountain thing to get a better picture of the fox. And he was sleeping. It was sunny out. He didn't really care that I was there, but it was just really cool. I've never seen anything like this area before.
Wow. So I imagine you got to see a lot of nature while you were there. I would love to dig into a little bit of that. Just from my little understanding and knowledge of Latin America, it's very nature dense. And I wonder, how do they kind of take care of it, or just from what you see, taking care of it and managing it kind of compared to how we do that with some of our like natural places here in America?
It was very subtle to me when we were there, because when you go to a national park here or a state park here, you know, there's like a toll booth and they stop you and they make you pay. And when you get there, there's rangers and they have guns, and there's like, you just know that you're being watched all the time. And it didn't feel like that in any of the places we were at in Chile, except when I started paying attention, I realized that we were stopped and the driver or the guide would sort of go in and register that we were in the park. And then as time went on, I started noticing there were absolutely rangers in the park, but there's just something about being in a place like that where people were just really respectful of the environment. You know, when the guide saw something on the ground, they would pick it up and not let it sit there. Same thing happened in Uyuni, by the way. You know, when they saw trash, it was like, no, we're all responsible for taking care of this. But what was really unique, they were explaining that like when we went to the geysers, the rangers that were there were from the community where the geysers were. And so there was like this mutually beneficial arrangement where they were working to take care of the parks, and the parks were bringing in the tourists that were helping provide income and means to the local economy. And so it wasn't like there were these outside rangers that would come in and police everyone and then go home. It was actually the community that had a vested interest in making sure that these sites were taken care of and well maintained and respected by everybody who was visiting, which was just really cool.
Hmm. I'm learning more about you throughout this journey, but I did not pick up on you being a huge nature lover. Is that something that you like enjoy? Is that something that you always try to see on your trips, or is it just coincidence being in Chile?
I think it's a little bit of a spectrum. And so one of the things I wanted to do on the trip was experience the things that my guests talked about, but also experience different parts of the world. in the way that people who go to those parts of the world experience them. So Caro talked about getting emotional when she saw different things like a sunrise or the stars. I wouldn't say that anyone who knows me would be surprised that that was not my reaction to nature at any point during this trip. But there were just multiple times in Chile where you would just sort of stop and look around and be like, my God, this is amazing. Like, where am I? And that reaction was quickly followed by, let me set up my tripod and try and do justice with my camera to what I'm seeing right now. So I wouldn't say I'm a nature lover. I'm a nature appreciator.
Okay.
And I try and put myself in situations to see things I haven't seen before in a lot of different ways, and that includes nature.
I know that just from what you just said, it's not really something where you thought you were going to have that emotional experience like Caro had, but was there anything that, like you said, you kind of stopped and looked around that was like, wow, this is phenomenal? Was there any specific moment?
There were two things that made this part of the trip special to me. One, one morning we got up really early to go see the geysers, and I started recording audio to go with the pictures, but it was like this massive field of hot springs, and some of them were spurting water, some of them had steam, and when you get there before dawn, it's still cold, so the steam is like in the sky. It's like this fog coming up out of the ground in all these different spots, and then the sun rises through the clouds, or the steam that coming from the geysers, and it was just really beautiful. And again, you just sort of stop and listen and take it all in. And then later in the trip, on our last day, we had a chance to finally get a clear sky at night and do a stargazing tour. And that basically meant that we walked to the edge of the property we were staying at, and they had set up blankets and pillows in this little flat patio. And we laid down, but because it had been so hot during the day, it was like super cozy and warm because it's chilly at night in the desert. And you're just like laying on like these hot patio blankets with pillows, staring up at the sky, and the guy's got his laser pointer and he's running through. You just kind of look over and it's like, wow, they've got a different sky down here. We don't have this many stars in Chicago. It's probably because there's so much light pollution, but when you get away from it all in the desert and there's really no lights near you, you can just see like how amazing the night sky is. And, I raised city kids and I've been living in the city for as long as I can remember, and I've never seen a sky like that before. And it was just something that we looked forward to every time we were out there and had a chance to look up at night and just say, wow, this is what we could see if life were different or we were living someplace else.
That story feels so familiar to me. It feels like the difference between Chicago and then going to Mississippi, which is like a home for me, and being able to see the stars every now and then and enjoying them. Thank you for that. That imagery is beautiful. I would love to dig into Santiago, and I think kind of connecting back what felt familiar. You got to visit Santiago, if I'm not mistaken, and really kind of dig into the city. What immediately felt familiar to you, or what immediately stuck out to you?
So depending on how you count some of the cities, we visited 5 capital cities on our trip through South America. Without question, Santiago felt the most like home. It felt the most like Chicago. The food was awesome. The people were friendly. It was very walkable. We put in miles every day. Tasha had me walking. And when we arrived, we immediately took a cable car to the top of a hill that had a giant statue of Mary, kind of like the Redeemer statue in Brazil. And Caro had told us we should check it out. So we immediately went over there when we put our bags in the hotel. And the views of Santiago, like on the cable car to the top and from the top, were just amazing. It is a massive, sprawling city, but it felt very familiar, even though it was my first time there, if that makes any sense.
And did you get to see every part that you had intended to see while you were there?
No, actually. Thanks to our wonderful friends at Lucero Travel, you can find my TripAdvisor review. Our day tour to Valparaiso and Viña del Mar was derailed by a poorly maintained bus. So it was 90 minutes away and they picked us up at 8. An hour later, we were still riding around picking up other passengers in Santiago, which was crazy. And then we didn't get there for another 6 or 7 hours because of all the bus issues. And when we finally got there, we spent 7 minutes at one square, and then it was time to go back home. So we spent the whole day riding around and waiting for a replacement bus. Sadly, there's been a tragic wildfire in that area that started a week or so after we left. So we didn't get to see it, although we were really excited to have the opportunity. And, we're hoping that the tragedy of what happened there after we left is starting to subside and people can rebuild, because it did look like a really wonderful part of the country to go visit.
I'm sad that you can't tell that story, but it sounds like you are the Yelp review guy that people talk about.
They will definitely see me on there.
What is something that you're going to take away from your time there immediately? Like, I want to dig into, what is something that you're always going to say? If I say Chile, you remember this.
Man, there were so many different experiences that we had because, in the north, in the desert, you have sort of one landscape, one entire way of doing things. Then you go to the city and it's like a real city. It's not a big town. It is a proper city. And in Santiago, it is such a big city. It was the first city that we were in that I don't think, like Peru, got a lot of tourists because we would ask people questions, say, I don't speak English. And we'd ask for menus in English because a lot of places have those. And they'd say, no, it's a Spanish menu. And they were like, we're a big city. If you're here, you do it the way we do it, which I thought was really cool. They put that line down and they were friendly about it. It wasn't standoffish, but it was just really neat to just say, no, I'm a guest here. It's not about them catering to me. It's about them living their lives and me trying to participate in what they're doing. And then going down to Patagonia, and the Patagonia experience was unique. It had been on my bucket list. Again, I'm not a nature lover, but I was like, it seemed like a really neat place to go. And what I'll remember, I was warned, but I didn't really fully appreciate it, is how quickly the weather changed. I mean, we had 3 days of tours. We used every minute we could. We saw the mountains, we saw the glaciers, we saw the lakes. It was truly amazing. And I don't consider myself a hiker, but I would get out there and hike every day with my big camera bag. But in Patagonia, you would just stop and look around, like I said earlier, and just be like, this is amazing. And the lakes are like this crystal blue. And then you have the mountains, and sometimes they're covered by clouds, and then they just break. You're like, whoa. And then you see the glaciers and the blue. We were on a boat that took us right by the glaciers, and just remembering that and comparing it to what I saw in Alaska several years ago, where you just say, sadly, I should see them now while I can, because I don't know how much longer we'll have them with us. But what I will remember is I bring a lot of camera gear when I hike, except this time my bag had a lot of other gear in it, because on one 4-hour hike, we had sun, so it was too hot to take clothes off. We had rain. It's wet. Put your rain gear on. We had high winds, like lean into it before you fall over, high winds. We even had sleet in one 4-hour walk on the same trail. Like, the weather changes were just something I've never seen that before. Like, I've had the Chicago, it's 80 degrees one day and it snows the next day, but not in the same 3 or 4 hour hike. And it was just fun. We had a really good time doing that and experiencing it and understanding why they made us bring all this gear on all these walks.
So I'm assuming that you are a hiking fan, or no?
I would say that I take it as a challenge. If I can carry my pack and hold it together and make it physically through the hike, yes. I'm more of a hiker than a camper. So I'm totally down to hike if the bus will pick us up or it's a loop and we're back at the lodge that night. But I'm certainly not one to hike and set up a tent. That would not be special to me. That would be torture.
And would you do Patagonia like this every single time?
So we have a rule where we don't go back to the same place twice, because there's a big world and there's a lot on our list that we have left to see. And so we figure before we start going back to places, we should go to other places for the first time. So I don't know that I would go back to Patagonia. I would probably go back to a different spot in the region, maybe on the Argentinian side or a different part of Patagonia. But in the near term, we have no plans to go back because we still have a long list of places to see.
Okay. Lastly, we always have to end our recaps like this. I love the story. It's my favorite part. So you got to tell me a good story that you take on stage with you that you need us to hear.
Yeah, I was trying to think because we experienced so many different things in Chile. And the thing that I think was in our family group chat that led to the most chatter was this. And Tasha knows I don't like cold water. When I take showers, it's usually hot. If we're home, I try and use the steamer to make it even hotter when I can. And at the place we stayed in Patagonia, there were people jumping in the lake by the spa, and they were referring to it as a cold plunge, and it was supposed to be refreshing. They had sort of the lake, and they had like a warm pool and the hot pool, and you're supposed to do the three of them, and it was supposed to be like this spiritual experience. So we heard about it when we arrived, and I said casually, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that before we leave. And for the rest of the trip, when people mentioned it, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to do that before we leave. And Tasha would sort of quickly come in. He's just talking, basically like, just ignore him. Like I'm some kind of crazy old man or something. And one of the things I take pride in is I always do what I say I'm going to do. And so when I first said it, I went, oh crap, like now you actually are going to have to do this thing. And, you know, she had touched the water on one of our hikes and it was freezing cold. And on our second to last day or last day while we were there, we got back in time and I was like, all right, you ready to come with me? She was like, I'm not doing that. What are you talking about? I was like, no, let's do it. I'm getting in the lake. And so I grabbed my swim trunks. We walked down the hill to the spa. I put on my swim trunks and it's cold. I mean, it's got to be like 50, 60 degrees outside. And when I go out there, there's this kid, he's like 20 something, and he jumps in like 2 or 3 times and he keeps getting out and getting back in. And I'm like, what is he doing? So without feeling it, because I heard if you touch the water, you won't get in. They're like, you got to just jump. And that's never my thing. I'm the guy at the beach who takes like, 20 minutes to get into the ocean because, I'm going in like 3 inches at a time because the water's cold. And so I set up my tripod, I set up my camera. I told Tasha, come videotape this because I don't know, I'll do it for the gram like I'm 15 or something. And so on the tripod, you can see me walk out with my robe and then I'm just in my bathing suit. And Tasha's out there like in a full North Face jacket with a hat and gloves on. And I just give her the thumbs up and jump into the water. And Taylor, that was probably the worst judgment that I demonstrated on the entire trip. The water was, I think they said it was between 40 and 45 degrees. Which in retrospect makes sense because it's just water running off from the glacier. So it's like literally it was ice. And here we are a couple minutes later and it's not ice, but it felt like ice. And I jumped in and my entire body felt like there were 1,000 injections of ice water all over my body. I would say I jumped in and was out and up the ladder in about 15 or 20 seconds. What was wild was even though it was 50 degrees outside, it felt warmer outside than it did in the water. And so that was a pretty unique experience. I don't think I'll ever do it again. I'm not a polar plunger. You won't see me in Lake Michigan in January. That stuff's crazy. But for that one moment in time, I lost my sanity and found myself swimming in a glacier lake for about 20 seconds.
I love how Tasha always gives you the side eye when you say and do things. It adds a level of charm to the stories.
I blame her. And when I got out, I blamed her for not having better judgment for me, to which she took no accountability and also made it clear that she wasn't going to do it. I will say on our very last day, so this must have been the second to last day, she did say that she thought about it and grabbed her bathing suit. And before she even picked it up and walked 3 steps, she was like, no, this is stupid. And she put it down and told me she's not doing it. So I'm the only one who has the video and she's the one who has the sense.
Wow. I appreciate that. Thank you, Keith, for letting me take the lead on this recap episode and once again allowing me to hear these amazing stories and chop it up with you for the listeners. This has been a great one as well. And I'm excited for the next one.
Thanks, Taylor. It's good to talk with you. Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get future episodes automatically. Go to myhomeisspecial.com for the occasional email update too. That's where links to photo galleries and a few other surprises will live. Be sure to follow KBev Photo on Instagram for behind-the-scenes footage during our journey, and it'll be in the stories. If you just want the photos, go to kbevphoto.com. There's a lot else on there to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.